You may be able to tell that I'm down near the grotto on the back of the property here this week. And I came down here because I remembered that there was a monument to God's 10 Commandments. What I didn't remember was that there was a quote at the base of the monument that has Jesus' words from this upcoming Sunday's gospel reading. His response to the Sadducees when they ask him, which commandment in the law is the greatest? Jesus responds, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." I think oftentimes when we think of God's law or, the law in general as we hear it in the scriptures, we think the 10 Commandments. But within the tradition, for the Jewish people, the law refers to the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And Jesus knows that whole body of the law left and right, like the back of his hand. And so he reaches back to 2 particular commandments of God that weren't on a list like this, but they were spoken to the people from God himself. The first one the Jews would have been very familiar with because they recited this verse 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, essentially. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is Lord alone. Therefore you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul." And the second one too, while they didn't necessarily recite it every day, it was something that wasn't too far off, and it was within the wider body of the law. And I mention this because Jesus has this response, and sometimes I think we think that Jesus is summarizing the 10 Commandments, and he is in these 2 commandments, summarize the love of God and love of neighbor. It's true. But it's almost like he's saying something new. And on the one hand, he isn't, because it was already contained in the law. On the other hand, it's new because we need to hear it again and again and again. Love nothing above your God, right? Love him with all your heart, mind, and soul and strength, with your whole being. And love your neighbor as yourself. It's revolutionary because we always need to do those things better. Certainly, there is something new about what Jesus has to offer. The life of God that he draws us into through his passion, death, and resurrection. Us having access to that through the sacraments. That is totally new. But at the same time, it's based on something that's been from the beginning of the tradition. Something that's been from the beginning written on our hearts, right? We're called to something higher. We're called to love our neighbor, to give the whole of our life back to him, to give the whole of our life in service to one another. That's so much of where these past few weeks in the scripture has been taking us. For about a month, we heard so much about, the forgiveness and the mercy of God and the call to live that mercy in our lives with other people. Well, what flows out of knowing the forgiveness and the mercy of God, but turning our lives back over to him, giving him all of ourselves, and so in turn going out and offering our lives in service to one another, to loving our neighbors as ourselves. Really understand it as Jesus calling and beckoning and renewing and giving new life to our hearts and to our lives, as we respond and love our God more and more with greater faith, with greater sincerity, with greater intensity, and love one another as ourselves, as God has called us to.